Oh my goodness. No, no, not her. Her. This is Aggie. Lots of flashbacks.
Yes. Going back today.
Yeah, Martin. So Aggie was really close friend with Sandy.
And lots of pictures and every time they saw her.
So there I hadn't seen Aggie in a long time, but I saw her photograph. That's a big memory.
We'll be in touch. Yeah.
I didn't tell anybody else I was coming.
Who is this guy?
He'll stop at some point, maybe. I kind of recognize him now.
So what do you do? What do you need to prepare right now? Like dances and songs? Yes, and I heard your name, but
I give here to the photograph.
That's when I saw it first. But then when you were sounded like you.
yeah, right, yeah. No, no, I just get my daughter.
Oh,
Yes, yeah, right, gotcha. Yes. So crystal. You know, like I have nieces. Yes. Yeah. And example, I have two nephews that I'm very close to, and they have wives. And when I'm speaking of them, the wives, my nieces are all, I mean,
That's the only brother that
yes, yeah, where does that suggest that? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I do call them, yeah, ladies. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, who cares? I guess at this point, they're It can have, I should say, it does, but very slightly. Yes, I guess, yeah. Yeah, 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 that's right. Interesting. Yeah. That's funny, yeah, that's right. Yeah, oh, that's funny. Well, I think, yes. You're right, you know, an hour. Anyway, nice to, yeah, just, basically, right after, yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. We are gonna go here, but Marianne asked Deborah Ross to finish it, so they'll be finished. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah. Someone else will add. We haven't had this.
Did you have the prayers for Taha? Aren't you glad that I brought you? No, we do it every year. Okay, so this is for Israeli soldiers.
So we'll do that first the Shaw covered edition,
I'll walk you through it.
Canadian.
The Legion is separate. Legion's going to be separate.
So, okay, so what I do have, this is from 2 years, it's from the Holocaust, this is what you told me how they are.
Okay, good. Okay, so you got it ready. start visiting deceased parents' grave without a stone? Does it have to be after?
Without the stone,
Yeah, are you allowed? In the first 11 months?
you can go for 30 days. It depends on
So after 30 days.
the tradition. Some people do it.
So it's halachically okay?
Yeah, but there's no stone, right?
No stone yet. Yeah, my mother passed away 3 months ago. Because her gravesite is here.
There's nothing there.
Nothing there, so are you allowed?
Can, if you know it's going to be. Some people, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Some people put the stone up after the 30 days after the shloshim. To go and, it's up to you. Do what's in your heart. There's no,
I didn't know anything and I was actually already like 2-3 weeks.
What you feel.
No, don't do the other one. One for the one for the then those in church and all our something. And then I'm going to do one for soldiers. Separate. Maybe I'll do another one for soldiers.
Okay, so this will be for the.
You want to look at it? Or?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Ellie was asking if we wanted to. We're not going to add Mrs. Normalcy into the list because she hasn't been buried yet.
I agree.
Yeah. But you might want to mention the funeral Tuesday at 2 o'clock. She was a survivor. I mean, I would check that actually. Yeah.
Take a picture. Jack, we ready to go?
Okay, great.
It is our tradition to say a few words of eulogy and to remember, most particularly those who have passed in the year of 5785. We've now turned into the year 5786. So we remember those who were interred over 5785, and of course also we remember all those who are buried in our cemeteries in this particular eulogy. And I wanted to just share a thought that I heard from a prominent rabbi and Bible scholar in Israel, Rabbi Yoel Ben-Nun. And he reflects on the fact that Yom Kippur is the anniversary of the forgiveness for the golden calf. If you do the math as the rabbis do, so we get the first set of tablets on Shavuot, right? So that's the beginning of the revelation at Sinai. So you go 40 days later, brings us to the 17th of Tammuz. 17th of Tammuz, that's the story of the golden calf. Moses breaks the first set of tablets, and then there is the period he goes up the mountain to ask for forgiveness. That's another 40 days. He's down for a couple more days, and he goes up on the first day of Elul to get, he has to schlep the tablets up this time. He takes it says, Psolacha shnei luchot avanim karishonim, make for yourself 2 tablets like the first ones, and he goes up the mountain, and then he comes back with the second set of tablets on the 10th of Tishrei, which of course is Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is that day which represents the forgiveness. But let's once again think about, there were 3 ascents to the mountain. The first ascent is for the first tablets, those are broken. The second ascent is an ascent where he gets the covenant of forgiveness. And I will tread on the cantor's turf for a moment. This is the covenant of forgiveness we use over and over again during the slichot that we recite over this time period, and we will recite them many, many times over Yom Kippur. And you are familiar with this because it has a tune. Hashem, Hashem, kel rachum v'chanun, erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, etc. What is interesting is the Talmud derives that there are 2 sets of laws. There is the written law, the luchot, literally written in stone, and there's oral law. And the verse from which it derives that the written law must stay written and the oral law is supposed to stay oral is from the words referring to the second set of tablets. That you should write these things at hadvarim ha'ela, and then it says al pi, through the mouth of, through the articulation of hadvarim ha'ela. And the Talmud says the written tablet, originally we had this tablet of stone. It was fixed. It was binary. You were either a Rasha or a Tovim. You were the Risha'im or the Tovim. You were the good or you were the bad. The first set of tablets talk about God as Kel Kana, a jealous God. And there is no room in the written law. Moses has to break the tablets of the law in order to forgive the people. But the covenant of forgiveness is the second kind. It is the beginning of oral law. It's al pi hadvarim ha'ela. It is through these words. And the oral law is something which I think on an experiential level we are much more accustomed to. We are much more familiar. Even though we read the Torah every week, we study the Torah in lessons, the Judaism that we live, the Torah that we live, that is the oral Torah. That is the mimetic Torah. That is the Torah that was taught to you at the Shabbat table. That is the Torah that was taught to you in so many places. And I like to tell the story of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who passed away several years ago. But he tells the story about when his grandfather passed away. And he said that the first year after his Zaidi died, he made sure that he was at Bubby's house to light the Hanukkah candles. And he lit them. And he knew exactly all the rules of lighting them and in what order you light the candles and what blessings you say at what point and where you position the candles, etc., etc. And he lit them, and he saw that his Bubby was sad. And he said, Bubby, I know why you are sad. You miss Zaidi. I also miss Zaidi. No, said Bubby, that's not why I'm sad. So then Rabbi Steinsaltz said, did I make a mistake in the lighting of the candles? Did I say something wrong? She said, no. What you did was fine. So, Bubby, why are you sad? Because, said Rabbi Steinsaltz, Bubby, Zaidi would dance after he lit the candles. You lit the candles, but you didn't dance. So our parents taught us a little bit of that. Maybe things you can't write in the book, things that you can't give solid instruction on. The things that create memories, things that create emotions, things that create connections. And that mimetic Torah, that sense of Torah as lived, is such an important part. And it was our parents who taught us to respect our grandparents. It was our parents who taught us where we came from. It was our parents who delivered to us the story, not only of our own particular families and their particular journey, but that journey in the context of the journey of the Jewish people and the importance of it and the nature of the identity and the idea that we are kind to strangers and that we have special sense of time and that we sanctify the Shabbat and that we have a period of time for repentance and all of those somewhat less tangible, less concrete things that the written law never, in its best moments, could have ever done. The written law is important. It is the, if you will, it's the backbone of the entire enterprise. But the living sense of it was taught to us by those who gave us the lived experience, the mimetic experience. And so it's here today that we come, to a certain extent, to remember those who gave us that experience. And even maybe in some cases, those that gave them, that we are remembering that experience. That in our cemeteries, we now go back over 100 years in terms, if you include, Mountain View and New Westminster and Surrey, we have a century of burials, a community that now is coming into more than a century of existence with traditions that are becoming its own. And so I would like to invite Eliezer de la Cruz to come and to recite the names of those who were interred over the past year. And while we recite only those names, we should also have in mind the names of the generations and generations that are buried here, and perhaps those even in other cemeteries in other places across the generations.
Thank you, Rabbi. Tirza Abraham, Rebecca Adarim, Noga Arbel, Mikhail Ashkenazi, Alex Bard, Nathan Bat, Gordon Bell, Ovadia Ben Nissim, Jack Bennis, Annette Berner, Esther Brandt, David Bryan, Natalia Burtney, Charlins Chalmy, Beverly Chamish, Galia Chud, Tamar Cohen, Sandra Constant, Cynthia Cook, Berta Ehrenberg, Rose Ehrlichman, Salomon Farjian, Michael Favel, Bernard Furman, Nassim Gabay, Marco Galante, Elona Gelfenbein, Michael Goldberg, Meyer Grinspan, Mikhail Gunner, Charles Herman, Linda Hotz, Nora Hutchinson, Diane Jampolsky, Sarah Jarvis, Mark Kaplan, Eric Carls, Marilyn Krieger, Lucy Loffer, Margalit Letterman, Jack Leschgold, Irina Liberoff, Jeffrey Lawn, Josie Lowy, Larry Ludwig, Chaya Madorsky, David Mandelman, Inga Manis, Anne Melul, Ida Naimatov, Lydia Patridge, Victor Perry, Marilyn Phillips, Colin Plotkin, Frida Portman, Mark Posen, Carol Potter, Manuel Rootman, Beverly Rubin, Abraham Sachs, Yitzhak Sadeh, Gary Sankov, Richard Siebold, Daniel Shapiro, Peter Simon, Barry Slutsky, Alan Tapper, Stephen Tex, Judith Toledano, Mary Walt, Les Weinstein, Berta Yehia, Jacob Zilberschatz, and Alvin Zapersky. May their memories be for a blessing. Thank you. And David Schaefer.
Now ask the cantor to recite the memorial prayer and ask everyone to rise for that.
רחמים, שוכם במרומים, תמצא מנוחה נכונה, תחסן כנפי השכינה, במעלויס קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע מהזירים, אס נשמס, חבר'ה של בית כנסת שערי צדק, שלחו ליילומם, בגן עדן תהי מנוחוסם, לכם בעלו רחמים יסתירהו וששי כנפיו ליילומים, וישרוי בישרוי רחיים אס נשמעיהם, אדוני הוא נחלוסם, וינוחו בשלום המשכבויסם, ונאמר אמן. אל מלא רחמים שוכם במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלויס קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע מזהירים, אס נשמס חבר'ה מחבר'ה קדישה, שלחו ליילומם, בגן עדן תהי מנוחסם, לכן בעלו רחמים יסתירהו וששי כנפיו ליילומים, וישרוי בישרוי רחיים אס נשמעיהם, אדוני הוא נחלוסם, וינוחו בשלום המשכבויסם, ונאמר אמן.
Please be seated. There was once a time when the members of the Legion used to run their own separate service. Over the years, as the members of the veterans of the Legion grew older and were unable to do their own service, we incorporated that into this service. And at the same time, we also recognized that it was appropriate for us to remember not only the soldiers who fought in Canadian Canadian forces and the royal services in the various European wars, world wars, but also, since this community is very attached to the soldiers of the IDF, we remember them as well. And so just a brief thought on that note. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, if you will, the sacrifice of Isaac. And the story, I think, is a very important story because it's a story which essentially announces that Judaism never has a moment where we willingly sacrifice our children, that God stays Abraham's hand and says, we do not sacrifice our children. But it also says that we are committed enough to the cause that we know that sometimes there are things that you have to be willing to lay everything on the line for. And the state of Israel is one of those things. Freedom, the tyranny of the Nazis was something worth laying everything on the line to stop. And we know that over the past 2 years, 900 soldiers, 900 young men have, and some women have given their lives. They've been their own, Akedah, they have been their own sacrifice, so to speak, saying that Klal Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, the greater Israel, the state of Israel, the people of Israel, are more important than my individual life. They are truly the inheritors of the willingness to sacrifice that Abram had, and we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the same time to stay the hand, that we hopefully have buried our last soldier already, and that with this season of Teshuvah, God will bring us peace and tranquility, an agreement that brings true peace and the return of all the hostages, so that Israeli mothers do not have to have sleepless nights wondering if their sons will be returning from their bases and from their units and from their battlefields. I ask the cantor to recite special, there are going to be 2 memorial prayers recited. One for the first one will be for the veterans of Canada and the other services of many of our members also served in the Royal Air Force and in various others of His Majesty's services. So that will be the first, and the second one will be a special prayer for the soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces.
El male rachamim, shoichein b'amroyimim, hamsei menucha nechoina, tachas kanfei hashechina, b'malois kedoshim u'toirim, kezoya rakia mahazirim, esni yishmas, Chayalei Marchei Canada Sholechu Le'yoilomam Beganei Dentei Menuchosam Lochem Alorachamim Yasirei Ubesei Kenofov Le'yoilomim V'Yisrael Rachayim Es Nishmaiseyem Adonai Nachalosom V'yonuchu b'shalom al mishkevoiseyem v'noimar Amen. Avinu Shebashamayim El Elohei Haruchos L'chol Basa Zechoino es Haneshamois Hazakois V'Tahoros Sheboneinu V'Noiseinu Asheru es Nafsham Lamus Mois Giboirim V'Cholzom Les Rasom V'Horetz Minishorim Mikalo Me'arayos Goveiro B'Milchamtom Leman Shichror Amom u'moiladitom, v'aloisam al mizbach tekumas Yisrael beretz kodshoi. Heifichu ruachoi zugevuro bechol beis Yisrael baretz, uvat futzois, v'yisoyer elikras geulasoi fedus nafshoi, yizkereim Eloheinu letoeva, Im rivevoyes alfei kedoshei Yisrael v'giboyrov mimei olam b'tzroi rachayim Yisroi res nishmasam b'ganei Eden teimenu chosam V'yanuchu b'sholom al mishkovom V'yamdu legoyro olam leketzayomin Amen.
Please be seated. Now going to turn the program over to Jack Michner, who has stewarded us as long as I can remember in this memorial service for the Kedoshim, the martyrs of the Shoah, and our members who have been survivors of the Shoah.
Gmar Chatima Tova. Thank you all for coming today. I have the unenviable job to announce that yesterday Mrs. Ilona Mermelstein passed away. Her funeral will take place on Tuesday here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. After the service concludes, everyone is invited to attend up at the monument. Transportation is available, And we'll be reading a number of names today who have been recently inscribed up at the monument. And if you want to read the names again or make any comments, you can feel free to do that up at the monument, and we'll recite Kaddish up there as well. I stand among you today as a person who wasn't supposed to be here. It's a strange feeling sometimes knowing that had the Second World War ended a little differently, who knows how many of us would be around. My parents of blessed memory were targets. With luck and likely some uncanny ability to adapt, they survived in Siberia and Tajikistan. Every European Jew in 1933 became a target. 12 years later, it ended, but not for all of our ancestors. My father, coming back on the train from Siberia to Poland, met a man from his hometown who told Dad not to return to Bilgorai because they would kill him. When his train landed in Katowice, the mining capital of Poland, he stepped off the train and was intercepted by members of Hashomer HaTzair, who told him not to go to the mines because they would kill him. And now it's my turn, our turn. We've arrived once again to an environment of anti-Semitism. Efforts made by the Jewish people collectively to remind the world of the Holocaust what the consequences of hate are have been monumental. In fact, efforts this past year have been, in my opinion, unprecedented. Here are some of the films that have been released in the past year: Goebbels and the Führer, The Commandant's Shadow, Riefenstahl, The World Will Tremble, Bonhoeffer, Nuremberg, coming next month to theaters, Bau, Artist at War, The Partisan, Truth and Treason, The Ring, The Tasters, Eleanor the Great, which I saw last evening. And you can't count the numbers of books published in the past year. The Khan's book will come out next month, October 19th. In November, I hope to see the play Hannah Senesh in New York. I'm still a target. We all are. I don't know whether October 7th and its aftermath created fresh hate for us, or whether it has simply provided an excuse for Jew haters to bring to the surface hate that was already there. Regardless, October 7th seems to have eclipsed the Holocaust and all its lessons. Of all the articles I've read, of all the stories I've heard over the last several years, just last week I saw one story that really jolted me. You can see, it says, I'm not very good at German. Juden haben ihr Hausverbot. Auch kein Antisemitismus kann ich nur nicht ausstehen. Jews have been banned from entering here. Nothing personal, no anti-Semitism either. I just can't stand you. The shop in Flensburg, northern Germany, displayed this sign. As we approach the 87th commemoration of Kristallnacht, the present looks a little bit like the past. This week, we read Parshat Vayelech. In this parsha, our ancestors entered the land of Israel. In various different parts of that parsha, God tells Yehoshua, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and brave. Today, this message speaks to us. Our main speaker today is Misha Menser. He's a retired senior partner of the Arbutus Law Group in Victoria. For almost 50 years, Misha worked on behalf of Indigenous peoples in Canada to protect and advance their legal rights. Internationally, he has worked with Indigenous peoples in Central America and Vietnam. He's been very active in Holocaust commemoration and education in Ottawa, Vancouver, and Victoria. He has spoken at numerous Shoah commemorations, Holocaust education forums, and schools. He was the keynote speaker in 2018 at the BC Legislature Yom HaShoah commemoration, and in May 2024 gave the keynote address at the State of Kansas Holocaust commemorations. Misha is a founding member of the Victoria Shoah Project, which is a group dedicated to innovative commemoration events and public education of the Shoah, and an original member of the Survivors Play Theater Initiative, bringing Holocaust education to schools on Vancouver Island in modern and creative forms. Misha.
Thank you, Jack, for your kind introduction, and for the rabbi and the chazan for those beautiful words. Excuse my voice, I'm just getting over a cold. But I want to begin by thanking the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, Shaare Zedek, and the Leo Lowy Fund for inviting me to speak here today. It is very meaningful for me to be here because I lived in Vancouver for 25 years, and the names of my family killed in the Shoah are inscribed on the Holocaust Memorial just up the way here, and I went to visit this morning, and it was very moving. So I'd like to tell you who I am. Those who don't know me and meet me see a proud Canadian, a retired lawyer who worked, as Jack explained, for many years with First Nations, a community volunteer, a Jew active in his synagogue, and much more. However, there's a deeper part of me that's not so apparent, and that is as a child of survivors of the Shoah. Names are important in Jewish tradition. My Hebrew name is Micha Yaakov. My first name, Misha or Micha, honors my paternal grandfather, who lived his whole life in Strozhenitz, a small shtetl or village not far from Czernowitz in Bukovina in Eastern Europe. My father was the youngest son, a college-educated financial manager, active in Zionism in his region before the war. My grandfather's family had been in Strozhenitz for generations before the war. They are well known and respected. I never met my grandparents as they died before the war. In fact, my father wrote a story called Batsheva about his mother, who died in the ghetto in Strozhenitz before the deportation. My middle name, Jacob Yaakov, honors my mother's brother, born in Suceava, another shtetl in Czernowitz in Bukovina in the late 1800s. My grandfather, Moshe, was a poor farmer, but yet his 9 children went to university, becoming engineers, teachers, medical graduates, and more. Yaakov, a history professor, lived in Sigid, and he and his family, together with my parents and grandfather Moshe, were deported to Bershed camp in December 1941. Yaakov died in the terrible conditions of that transport. 80 years after the end of World War II and the liberation of the camps, there are very few survivors. Those like me, their children, are the closest we have to direct knowledge and understanding of life before the Shoah, the dark days of the war, and the rebuilding of lives by survivors in strange countries. My father passed away in 1959 when I was 9 years old, and I did not hear directly about the Shoah from him. However, he recognized the importance of the world hearing from a direct witness to these tragic events and wrote over 20 short stories in Yiddish about his experiences. In my father's own words, "My work has its goal not to convey facts that are already known, but rather moments and images of the ghetto, the long road of deportation, life in the concentration camp, and the way home." These stories are testimony which cannot be denied, providing a personal view of the Shoah and its impact. Some of them describe the brutality and the dark side of humanity. Others speak to the good of the people. Several tell of the resilience of the human spirit. All, however, implicitly ask the question what we can and must learn from this terrible period in history. In 1982, I discovered these stories, written in Yiddish, together with numerous photos and documents, in an old brown suitcase when my mother passed away. I'm grateful to my cousin Doris Steininger of Haifa, Shaya Moser, Sheila Barkowski, and David Schaefer, who helped translate these Yiddish stories for me to work with. Special appreciation goes to David Schaefer, who became a dear friend and a mentor. I miss him deeply, as I'm sure many of you do. Thanks also go to Rachel Minnis, who in recent years professionally updated these translations. I struggled for many years with what to do with this invaluable material. In 2021, Professor Helga Thorsen of the University of Victoria invited me to be part of the preparation of a digital exhibit called Stories of the Holocaust. In that project, she paired a survivor or a child of survivors with a graduate student, and they were asked to prepare a story of their family. Some did it through music, some did it through art, some did it through personal interviews. I chose to do so through my father's stories. That project was instrumental in helping me break through my hesitation in getting started, and in many ways led me to be there today. So it's autumn now, and I went for a walk in the cemetery before, and it was a little cloudy and getting a little cooler, and I couldn't help but thinking what the autumn of 1941 was like in Strožinec, where my family was there just before the deportation, because the weather was the same. Simchas Torah will be celebrated in a few weeks. My father wrote a story about the last Simchas Torah in the Strožinec ghetto. They'd been put in a ghetto before the deportation. It's called Hakafot, and I'd like to read it to you today. We all remember going to the Hakafot with our flags and red apples. And for those who may not be possible remember Simchas Torah, I'm testing my Jewish knowledge, but it's beginning of the Torah, receipt of this, and it's a big celebration. And there's dancing in the synagogue. It's a very joyous celebration. We all remember going to the Hakafot with our flags and red apples, accompanied by our fathers and relatives. Later, as older boys, we'd spend the entire days deliberating over the blessings. And later still, as young men, we ourselves would be invited to carry a Torah scroll during the Hakafot ceremony. In time, we'd lead our own children on the same path, the way of the golden chain. But these Hakafot were completely different. They were gloomy, with no festive spirit, no brightness or light. For the past 2 days, people in the ghetto had known the Romanian government was about to force all the Jews out of the shtetl, people who lived there for generations, and deport them to the blood-stained Ukraine. Wagons were already standing ready at the train station, and on Simchas Torah, everyone would be forced to leave. Our cantor, Rabbi Chaim Lerner, a tall Russian Jew who had devotedly served the synagogue with his singing, insisted we perform the Hakafot ceremony to say goodbye to the holy Torah scrolls. The great synagogue was dark. Jews no longer had electricity. Only a small few candles burned. The cantor said the prayer, Ata ha'araita, unto thee it was shown. The Torah scrolls were removed from the Holy Ark, and 20 Jews walked with them with deep emotions and heartfelt weeping. We were frightened. We couldn't bear to let go of the scrolls, and so sobbing into them and embracing them tightly to our hearts, we came to the end of the Hakafot ceremony. The Torah scrolls were placed back into the Holy Ark for the last time, this time forever. The synagogue was locked. The caretaker Meyer gave the priest his synagogue key, which had been a talisman to help women struggling in childbirth and delivered others from painful deaths. With that key, Meyer handed over a piece of his soul. He breathed his last on the first leg of the long journey to Yednitz. 4 years later, I returned to the synagogue. The Holy Ark and the Torah scrolls were gone. The building was now an ordinary warehouse. Our synagogue stands alone, abandoned, and weeps and weeps. My parents and family were deported in December 1941 to Bershad, a small town in the Ukraine, where Jews had lived since the 1600s. It became the biggest of the concentration camps in the area, and by all accounts, the worst. My family was among 20,000 Jews held for nearly 3 years in a small, confined area surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. Bershad was not an extermination camp, but thousands died of disease, starvation, and random killing by the guards. The first winter was particularly freezing, and my grandfather Moshe was among the many who died. Thousands more perished before the camp was liberated in 1944. My father's writings about that time, such as in The Gangster and The Angel Story, described a range of human qualities, from the guards' unspeakable cruelty to the kindness shown by some guards. In Nachman the Pious, he wrote of religious Jews holding on to their beliefs and traditions even in these unbelievably difficult times, and the bravery of Jews escaping the camp to fight with the partisans. The Provocateur story is special. It's about my father's best friend, lawyer Michael Schrentzelt, whose name I inscribed in the Holocaust Memorial here, who, when called in and questioned by the guards, refused to reveal the hiding places of the fighters. Schrentzelt was never seen again. These are a few examples of my father's writings, which make Bershad life very real and personal. My mother taught me, too, about what went on, and she told me some hard stories, but she also told me of the decency of the non-Jewish man who came to the wire at night, bringing them food, knowing full well that if he would be caught, he would immediately be killed. She told me of the priest in Bucharest who, when the Nazi guards came to the neighborhood and asked the priest if there were any Jews in the neighborhood, said, "There are no Jews here," knowing full well that my aunt and uncle lived next door to the church. I learned that although Jews were the central target, others were targeted, deported, and killed because of their race, political or religious belief, disability, or sexual orientation. My mother taught me that it does not diminish the memory of the Shoah to give full recognition to the suffering of others and the heroism of non-Jews who helped at great risk to themselves. In the spring of 1944, news trickled into Bershad that the Russian army was advancing and the camp guards fled. There was concern that my father, even in his weakened state, would be taken into the Russian army. My parents left the camp despite the dangers of ongoing fighting to make their way back home. My father chronicled this journey in several stories which reveal the strength of survivors, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Survivors were determined to hold on to their Jewish identity even if they were not religious. Notable, and perhaps one of my favorite father's stories, is called Seder in a Lom Hut, and it's been read at many Seders and been published many times. It tells of a Seder cobbled together by survivors in a barn in an abandoned village in 1944, even while the war was going on. The story talks of their Seder and the feeling of the participants there. I believe by holding this Seder, the survivors were saying, "You may kill our people, but you cannot kill who we are." Their courage and will to survive still inspires me today. Some of my father's stories about this time, such as The Way Home, him chronicling going back to his home village after the liberation of the camp, described the destruction of his home, of the synagogue, of the Jewish school in the village, and of the cemetery that was neglected. My father sadly says he could not stay in his town and left. Other stories are more hopeful and heartwarming, and I'd like to read one of them today. It's called The Cherry Tree. Mendele always dreamed of the big cherry tree that stood in front of his house, in his old home in a small Bessarabian town. He was a little boy when he and his whole family were driven out. At that time, the blossoms of the cherry tree were white. Every spare moment, he would climb into the tree and absorb himself into the sweetness of beautiful nature. In the Bershad camp, where we were together with his father and mother and 3 brothers, when we'd be reminiscing about our old home, Mendel would slowly come close and ask his father, "Tata, is the tree still standing in front of our house? Who is picking the cherries? Will I ever climb it again?" A sadness overcame us, hearing this child and his dreams. He went on to say, "Father, when I get home, my first deed will be to climb the cherry tree." When the camp was liberated and we slowly made our way home, we had to go to the place where Mendele's parents lived. They had arrived in their home several days before. When Mendele saw us, the first thing he did was to take us to his cherry tree. He climbed up agilely and called out in a happy voice, "This summer, I myself will pick my cherries." Tears welled up in our eyes, seeing the happiness of the child. The dream of a Jewish child had materialized. My parents reunited with surviving family members in Bucharest, spent a few years after the war recovering their health and organizing papers for immigration. A cherished photo shows my parents with the family. Soon after, most of them left. Many went to Israel. Others were scattered around the world to the United States, Canada, South America, Australia, and probably other countries. No one from my family remains in Eastern Europe. I often wonder what my family life would have been like if there'd been no Shoah. Would I had siblings? Would we have remained or emigrated? What would it have been like to know my grandparents? These, of course, are unanswerable questions, made more stark by the reality that there's likely nothing remaining that marks the long history of my family in Bukovina. My parents left Romania May 7th, 1984, by ship to France en route to Canada. The ship stopped in Israel a few days later, and many people got off. My father, a lifelong labor Zionist who had a brother and sister and many family members in Israel, wanted to jump ship. The date is relevant, a few days before May 14th, 1948, when the War of Independence was on in Israel. My mother said, "We've just come from a war. We cannot survive another war. We need to go to Canada," and they did. Sadly, my father never got to see Israel. Again, another potentially life-changing, unanswerable question. What would life have been like had they jumped ship and stayed in Israel as my father wanted? I can never know. My parents arrived in Canada in Halifax, January 17th, 1949, going to Ottawa, where I was born somewhat unexpectedly 22 months later. Life was not easy for them, adapting to a new country and starting over. The anti-Semitism, however, that they experienced in Europe was not geographically limited. I only found one story that my father wrote about life in Canada. It's called The Little Swastika, and I'd like to read it to you today. It was on the 7th of May, the day that the world murder ended, and the democratic world carried off such a beautiful, hard-earned victory over fascism, which had as its goal the enslavement of free nations and of free will. I ventured forth with my wife for a walk in a quiet area of the city, and our eyes were delighted to see the beautifully tended lawns, and we thought how good it was that this continent was so distant from the arena of war and that its inhabitants could enjoy peace and domesticity. We stopped in front of a green mailbox, and involuntarily my eyes discovered on it a small swastika. One could see that the man who had etched this sign of murder knew something of symmetry. In a flash, my peace of mind vanished. Never again did I rejoice at that beautiful day in May. No longer could I admire the pretty houses and lawns. A single thought was drilled into my brain. 5 years after the war, who had etched this swastika here? It must have been not long ago, because the green mailboxes are a new installation. Who wants to bring the flag of hatred and murder to this peaceful land? A friend recently told me of being in the company of some people talking about German books, and one said, "I also have German books. I have Hitler's Mein Kampf, which I rescued from Europe." A connection between the little swastika and Hitler's Mein Kampf presses forward. I had thought that after all the misery of 4 years in concentration camp, in this beautiful land, I would forget everything that I had suffered. But here I discovered the unfortunate sign which pursues me on all my paths and awakens in me the reawakening of fascism. My father got sick in 1959 and passed away in 1955 and passed away in 1959. However, I do have fond memories of him. He remained an active Zionist and interested in Israeli issues, writing letters and many articles. He taught me about Israel and Jewish culture. I never went to Hebrew school when he was alive. But there was so much more to my father beyond the tragic experiences of the Shoah. He wrote poems and read me children's book, my favorite being Robin Hood. The memory of him reading to me on the edge of my bed is as vivid today as it was nearly 70 years ago. One of my most curious finds among his papers was a jingle he wrote and sent to Coca-Cola for an ad campaign. The jingle and Coca-Cola's polite rejection reply bring a smile to a face when I read it, as it reveals a playful side to my father that I had not known. I add this because I do not want to leave you with the impression that the painful experiences of my parents were the totality of their personality or how they, and in particular my mother, raised me after my father's death. My mother, with remarkable strength and full of love, shaped me growing up. How she did this, in light of what she experienced, astounds me. She died in 1982, but had the satisfaction of seeing me finish my studies and become a lawyer doing socially meaningful work. My parents were extraordinary people. They taught me, by words and by example, the values of openness, generosity, ethics, and respect for all peoples. They also taught me that it is important to fight hate, wherever and against whoever it rears its ugly head. I was asked to speak today as a child of survivors and what that means to me. As I explored my father's stories, the photos and the documents from the brown suitcase, two aspects jump out. The first is personal. Why do I do this? The answer is simple. To understand who I am and how to move forward in life, I need to understand where I came from. Speaking about my family and reading my father's stories is a way to honor my parents, their strength not only to survive, but to create new life. Perhaps the most interesting and unexpected part for me was getting to know my father through his writings, something that was denied to me by his early death. While there are many unanswered questions, this exploration has been and is enriching and positive. A man who saw and experienced terrible horrors had the strength to survive, write of those experiences, to recognize the individuals with their names who died, so history could never forget or deny. Yet, he still had the capacity to begin life anew, find joy with a new child, and even write Coca-Cola jingles. A second aspect of being second generation is broader. By sharing my father's stories with the public, I can keep the memory of my family and those murdered in the Shoah that he wrote about vivid and real. Talks from children of survivors, putting a face to families, putting a name, putting experiences before you, reveal the reality of the Shoah and what's been lost. It is essential to remind new generations and societies like Canada that did not experience the Shoah firsthand of the dangers of anti-Semitism and of hate against any group. Shockingly, my father's story, the little swastika that I just read to you, could have been written today. The rise in anti-Semitism is truly alarming, as is the rise against hate for so many groups. But anti-Semitism seems to be, at the top of the hit list. The passage of time cannot and should not erase the lessons of the Shoah. New creative ways can teach about the Shoah to schools and the public. Examples such as the graphic novel But I Live, with the stories of David Schaefer and others told with the assistance of artists, make them accessible to the children. Plays directed at school-aged children like the Survivors Play, which has been presented in over 35 middle schools in BC and is still ongoing, are another way for the young to learn what happened and to learn those lessons. Our schools need to teach about the Shoah and the dangers to society if we ignore that history. Young people, with our support, have an opportunity to do better. One of the most important learnings for me through this process is not to see the Shoah simply as a story of victims. It is tragic, However, my father's stories tell of bravery, resistance, strength of Jewish belief, and resilience. While we mourn the killing of so many innocents, we must also honor and recognize the strength of survivors and the courage of those who fought back. This is also our legacy. I want to close by remembering my parents. While they experienced terrible loss and dislocation, they created new life and provided me with strong ethical values by their words and actions. They also taught me that everyone, and I as a child of survivors in particular, need to speak out and take action whenever, wherever, and against any person who faces hate or discrimination. On this day of remembrance of the Shoah, I can do no greater honor to my parents' memory than to tell their story and share their values, so that no peoples will have to stand alone when targeted by the hateful few. Thank you.
Thank you, Misha. Cantor Ojek will now chant Kelmolei Rachamim. Please rise.
Kelmolei Rachamim Shoichein Bameroimim Hametzei Menucha Nechoina Al Kanfei Ashechina B'mahalois Kidoshim Utoyerim Kizoya Rakiya Mazhirim Es Nishemois Hakidoshim Yatehoyerim Sheometo V'sheneherigo V'sheni yishchato V'sheni yisrefu V'sheni yitbeyu V'shenechaneku Al Kiddush Hashem Al Yedei HaTzorerim HaGimonim Yemach Shemam V'zichrom Beganei Eden Temenu Chosom Locheim Bal Rachamim Yastireim B'seisi Kenofav Le'olamim V'yitzroi b'Yisroi Rachaim Es Nishmoiseyem Adonai Unachalosom V'yonuchu b'shalom Al Mishkevoiseyem V'noimar Amen.
Thank you, Cantor. Please be seated. Deborah Ross Grayman, with her husband Henry, is the coordinator of the Second Generation group in Vancouver. Deborah will now come and read the names of her family, and those names have recently been inscribed up at the monument. Deborah.
Thank you, Jack. Marianne Rev is a member of the Second Generation, and she recently had 13 names of her relatives who were murdered in the Shoah inscribed on the memorial wall, and I am honored to read their names. Jonas Israel, Magda Israel Frischman, Erno Shruel David Frischman, Esther Frischman, Malchutza Frischman, Sarale Frischman, Idale Frischman, Toddler Frischman, Infant Frischman, Unborn Child Frischman, Mancy Reese Schwartz, Laszlo Schwartz, Gabor Schwartz. We gather here today, and as we speak their names, we remember and we honor them. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Dr. Abby Wenner-Herlin is a third-generation survivor and Associate Director of Programs and Community Relations at the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center. Abby will now read the names of others who have been inscribed at the monument. Abby.
Thank you, Jack. I have the honor of reading the names of all the local survivors from all the different congregations and unaffiliated survivors who passed away this year. And it is a real honor for me to do this. For the families who are here and those watching, may everyone be comforted by the practices of remembering them, and may their memories always be for a blessing. I ask kindly that once I've read through the names, if you wish to add the name of your loved one who was a survivor that we may not know of, who's passed away this year, please stand and say their names. And then we ask that following the reading of names, that we have a moment of silence together. Apologies for any mispronunciations as well. Drubetsky Arkady, Faye Alexander, Janos Benish, Yehuda Bayer, Charlene Shalmi, Berta Ehrenberg, Meyer Grishban, Lev Kadishevich, Chaim Kornfeld, Rudolf Rudy Kovanek, Maya Krasnov, Lana Gitterman, Lucy Loffer, Leonid Matyutkov, Alona Mermelstein, Susanna Romanova, Victor Schulman, David Schaefer, Rose Sletsky, George Shaz, Tom Sekeli, Tatiana Poruskevetsky.
Please rise for a moment of silence in memory.
Please be seated.
Thank you, Abby. Al Scheinman is the president of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center. He will lead us in the Kaddish. Please stand if you can.
Yiskadal v'yiskadash shmei Rabbah. Ve'alma divrach erusei ve'yamlich malchusei v'chayechon v'imechon v'chay d'chol beis Yisrael ba'gala v'zman kari ve'imru amen. Yesh shmei Rabbah mevorach le'oma amei omayim. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yitboar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalal v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela u'le'ela mikol berchasa v'shirasa tushbechasa v'nechamasa Damiran ve'alma ve'imru amen. Yehesh lama rabba min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael V'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'imramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'yimru amen.
Please be seated. Well, that concludes the service. There are a couple of unveilings happening very shortly, actually. At 12:30, unveiling of Chaim Kornfeld of blessed memory, and at 1 o'clock, Longina Diamant of blessed memory here at the cemetery. Of course, feel free to attend. And as mentioned earlier, we will go to the monument now, and anyone who wishes can place stones at the names of their relatives inscribed, their ancestors, and will chant or recite the Kaddish there as well. Thank you again for being here, and Gmar Chatima Tova. If anybody needs a ride, there is transportation available. Howard is right here. He will take you up.